Welcome to today's program in celebration of Hispanic Heritage Month. I am Ruma Gonzalez, young adult librarian of Los Angeles Public Library's Sunland-Tujunga branch, and I am here with my colleague, Mr. Edwin Rodarte, senior librarian of Emerging Technologies and Collections. Today, we have the pleasure to introduce the multi-talented poet, Laureate Mr. Luis Rodriguez. Mr. Luis Xavier Rodriguez is a poet, novelist, journalist, critic, and columnist. He was the 2014 Los Angeles Poet Laureate. His poems include Borrowed Bones, My Nature is Hunger, and others. Mr. Rodriguez is recognized as a major figure in contemporary Chicano literature. He identified himself as a native Chicanx writer in his most recent book. His best known work, Always Running, La Vida Loca, Gang Days in LA, received the Carl Sandburg Literary Award. Among others, it has been the subject of controversy when it was included in school reading lists in California, Illinois, Michigan, and Texas due to its frank depictions of gang life in 1998. Mr. Rodriguez received the Hispanic Heritage Award for Literature, among other awards, for his writing and community work. Mr. Rodriguez has also founded or co-founded numerous organizations, including Tia Chichua's Press, which publishes the work of unknown writers, Tia Chichua's Centro Cultural, a San Fernando Valley Cultural Center. We are thrilled to welcome him today to chat a little about his extensive career in the literary world. Welcome, Mr. Rodriguez.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thank you. I'm really glad to be here.
We have received some questions from high school students. My first question is, what inspired you to want to become a writer?
So let me just say that people know from reading my memoirs, I was a very troubled kid. I wasn't good in school. I was on drugs. I was in a gang. I was in and out of jail, juvenile hall. What saved me, one of the things that saved me is I really love to read books. Books really spoke to me. And I remember even when I was homeless down the streets of LA, I would go to that Central Public Library. And I was 15 years old and in bad shape, but I went to that library and man, I loved those books. I read as many books as I could. So the library was one of my saving graces. And it got me thinking that maybe I should be a writer. And I started to first write in juvenile hall and in jail. And what I want to do is share a poem that I wrote when I was 16 years old. I was sitting in the murder's row of the Hall of Justice jail there in downtown LA. And I had a cell next to Charles Manson. It was for murders that I didn't do, but it didn't matter. They arrested me and they were trying to get me for these things. Anyway, as I was sitting there, I wrote one of my poems. I want to share a poem that I wrote that I fixed up years later, but it really speaks to, it's called The Calling, because it speaks to why I was being called. And it goes like this. The calling came to me while I languished in my room, while I whittled away my youth in jail cells and damp vital fields. It brought me to life out of captivity in a street-scarred and tattooed place I called body. Until then, I waited silently, a deafening clamor in my head, voiceless to all around, hidden from America's eyes, a brown boy without a name. I would sing into a solitary tape recorder, music never to be heard. I would write my thoughts in scrambled English. I would take photos in my mind, plan out new parks, bushy green, concrete free, new places to play and think. Waiting, then it came, the calling. It brought me out of my room. It forced me to escape night captors and street prisons. It called me to war, to be writer, to be scientist, and march with the soldiers of change. It called me from the shadows, out of the wreckage of my barrio, from among those who did not exist. I waited all of 16 years for this time. Somehow unexpected, I was called.
Mr.
Oh, that's really intense.
Thank you. Mr. Rodarte?
Yes. So, I mean, that's, I think, one of a perfect example of, like a perfect answer to the previous question. I just wanted to follow up about what sparked maybe that initial love for poetry. You already talked a little bit about that, but if not, if you can just grace us with another poem, that would be awesome.
Well, I think these are facilities that people have inside of them already. For some reason, my gift was language. Now, the way I grew up, I shouldn't have been about language. Nobody liked books. Nobody, my whole family, except for my dad, nobody liked books in my family. None of my homies. I shouldn't. The schools had very low number of books. So in other words, I shouldn't have been about books. I really feel it was a destiny. It's something that I had inside of me that somehow had to break through, and I'm fortunate that I was able to break through. So I'm gonna. I got a really long poem, but I'm just gonna read the last part of it, where I first went to my first poetry reading, and I was on drugs, and I had won an award for writing, and ended up at Berkeley. I took a plane, the first plane I ever took in my life, which even though I'd been shot at, I had razor blades to my neck, I've been beaten down. I was never scared of jail or any of that, but I was scared of that plane. I was scared to death. It was like the scariest thing I ever could be. But I want to read the ending of this poem because there was three poets that read there. Jose Montoya, David Henderson, and Pedro Piatri, Chicano, African-American, Puerto Rican. They knocked me out. They were so amazing. I had no idea what poetry was. I was doing writing, but I didn't know what I was doing. They woke me to the power of poetry. And I just want to end with the end part of this thing. Um, I had never heard words spoken this way. More music than talk, more fevered shapes than sentences, more Che and Malcolm than Shakespeare. These poems came for me, lassoed my throat, demanded my life savings, taking me for a sunset ride. These poems were graffiti scrawls along the alleys and trash strewn tunnels on my body, the metaphoric methadone for the heroin hurting through my bloodstream, the lifeline I already had inside and didn't know. These poems were pool sticks, darkened gangways, a swirl of sunrise after the graveyard shift, a blood black yelling behind torn curtains, a child shrieking and nobody coming to help. These poems were shadowed intent, startled doubt, sorrows without grief, the moon without sky, unknown melodies, the falling inside that happens when you push razor onto wrist. They came from me as I sank into my suicide while fidgeting in a chair, inching under the skin as I wondered why I even came. Jose, David, and Pedro. I was never the same after this. They came for me and I've never let go. They came for me and I've perspired poems ever since. They came for me and all my dictions, my sorry ass lies, my falling mask, my pissed off wives, neglected children, angry friends, and back to back failures could never ever take them away.
My question, next question, you almost covered little bit. Anyhow, are there any memories or defining moments from your upbringing or heritage that you have brought into your writing?
Well, I was mentioned before we got on, but I want to tell the story. My mother, it's very hard in Mexico to be educated. You could go up to the primary grades public school. After that, you have to pay. It's really hard. And most people will never go beyond primary school. My wife's mom and dad never went beyond first grade. That's just a lot of poor people. That's how it is. But my mom, who was very poor, she was Tarahumara native from Chihuahua, Mexico. And the natives were not treated very well, and they were not given the help they needed. But she was so smart that she went all the way up to secondary school and even entered a secretary training school, which is very hard for women. And so she was very learned. And one thing that she learned was she learned declamation, which is you memorize poetry. in Spanish, which is very rhythmic. The language is so rhythmic. So when I was a kid, and this is very important for me, she used to do these poems before we went to bed. You know how people tell short stories or whatever. You know, my mom would tell stories too, but she would do these beautiful poems in Spanish, and she would rock with the rhythm of the poems. And it was so instrumental for me, I think. It didn't affect my other siblings, which who knows, there's a lot of reasons why that, but it really impacted me.
Mr. Rodriguez, Mr.
Rodarte.
Rodarte.
Yes, no, I'm glad to like hear that story from Luis about his upbringing. You know, I grew up in Mexico as well, and so I know that the oral traditions in Mexican culture, you know, whether that is poetry or just cuentos or some other stories, are always very part of our culture, I think. So that's great. You've written also, fiction. Do you know, how does the poetry differ from your fiction writing?
So I would say, to me, poetry is more about the language, swimming in the language, and also voice, especially the deep soul voice that I want to share. And it doesn't mean you don't do that in fiction, but fiction to me is more about story. So you can have some poetry in the fiction and you can have story in the poems, but one is more about the others. You know what I'm saying? So when I'm doing poetry, I'm more interested in the language and the imagery, the descriptions, but also the emotional power that I can bring out. And when I'm doing a fiction story, I really, really focus on the story. Can I tell a good, powerful story? It might have poetry in it, you know what I mean? But it's more about the story than anything else.
My question now, what has been the biggest challenge for you as a writer?
Well, I think all of us, and I think anybody that wants to make a living somewhere, you always have your doubts. Again, it's kind of like the imposter syndrome. I don't know if you heard this, where people feel like when you write and you get known, sometimes you feel like, hey, maybe I'm not really good enough, or why are they even paying attention to me? You start feeling like I'm an imposter. I don't belong here, which is a terrible thing. Of course, I'm not an imposter. Of course, I belong where I belong. Of course, I worked hard to get to where I've gotten. But it's really a big problem, and I think it has to do with the way our society layers everything from race to class. And unfortunately, I got both hit because my race is more indigenous, Mexican indigenous, as a Chicano, but also working class. You know what I'm saying? So you have to deal with that reality, which means I have to break through a lot of barriers, because there's still barriers to who you are and what race you're from and or what class. So I think those were the biggest problems I had, is how to break through all the barriers and really prove to anybody, not only that I have value, but anybody has value.
Mr. Rodarte?
Thank you. What are some of your current favorite writers or poets, and what is it about their work that draws you to them?
Well, I'm very taken by the young writers coming up. I picked up a book by Javier Zamora. It's called Undocumented. It's about his journey as a undocumented migrant from El Salvador. Very beautiful poetry, very well written. I was taken by the work of Erica Sanchez, who's written about her life and her family growing up. I was taken by the work of I don't know. I can name so many people. I got so many people in mind that I forget. But anyway, there's a lot of new young voices that I'm picking up. I have to mention the voices of people I published in Tia Chucha Press, Louis Resto, Mayra del Valle, Leticia Hernandez, Linares Hernandez. I can name you more people Chiwan Choi. In other words, really powerful poets that we're bringing up. I really love these young poets. I think they're braving new ground and putting forward imaginative, uniquely composed poetry, and I just love it.
Thank you.
My question is, where did you get your information or ideas for your books?
Well, essentially, it's my life. It really started with my life. I lived such an intense life. It's very hard for me to imagine another life that wasn't more intense. You know what I'm saying? But I will say one thing: since I started doing my poetry about my life and people around me, not just about me, and my memoirs covered it, I got to the point where now I think I was ready to make up stories, you know. And this is where my short stories happened and my novel. I finally got to the point that, hey, listen, I've written a lot about me and people around me. I think I can make up good characters, and I started doing that, and I'm very excited about that. I like to consider maybe doing another either novel or short story collection, because I think fiction is powerful. It has so many truths, even if you're making up things. But you got to be careful, because memoir, for example, you can't really make up stuff. You really shouldn't be making up. The trust you have with the reader is you're not making it up. But memoir is based on memory, which is faulty, and the reader gives you that. Okay, it gives you that leeway. Just don't make it up. But they know that I'm not going to remember everything exactly the way it was. It's not an accurate journalistic account of my life. You know what I mean? Other people can do that. It's more what the emotional value of my life has been and the scenes that I bring out. But they have to be true to my memory of it, knowing that it's faulty. But when you're doing fiction, you're just making up characters and situations. It's quite an amazing process.
Thank you. I'm actually going to go back a little bit to the previous question. I know that the publishing landscape itself is ever changing, and so there's always stories that are coming out. There's new voices, as you're mentioning. Do you find that there's interest for more diverse stories? And I know that you have the Chuchas Press, and how is it helping, like, maybe fill some of this gap?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think there is. I think there always is. The publishing world, though, is kind of a weird creature. It's like any industry. It's more about the profits that it can make. And and they'll tell you, they gear it towards that reader in middle America. You know what I'm saying? Which is generally a white woman in her 30s to her 60s. I mean, they have a market, they have demographics. So they're figured if these people read the books, that means that they'll make money. You see what I'm saying? So what happens is a publisher like small presses or even imprints with big presses take chances on books like mine. I'm fortunate in that I've had small publishers. I published my first book. I've had art books based on my writing, but I've also had Simon & Schuster and HarperCollins, the big boys, publish my work. So I've been able to do the whole spectrum of publishing. And there's value, there's good things in each one of those. So I've been lucky. Unfortunately, a lot of people with strong voices aren't getting seen that way and aren't being published. There's still a big problem with publishing, as you know, from the American Dirt controversy, where they had primarily a white woman tell the story of a Mexican migrant. People began to open up and say, wait a minute, we can tell those stories, what's wrong with us? We have tons of stories. So now it's becoming an issue again, just like TV and films are challenging. Why are you constantly telling stories with only white people that anybody of any color can do? Actors and cinematographers, directors. So I think it's challenging now, a lot of this, but we're still not there yet.
Thank you.
My next question. Do you have any advice for young people that want to become writers during this pandemic?
Oh, I have a lot of advice. I would recommend, since some people have to be at home, but many people have to be at home, read all that you can. Reading to me was really the key that turned everything. If I didn't read, and again, why did I love reading? It just spoke to me. People love music, people love dance, people love art. I actually love all those things, but I really got to reading, and reading helped me become a writer. So I would say use this opportunity. If you're at home, you don't want to be out there in the world because of the pandemic, read. You know what I mean? And then if you want to be a writer, then take your journal and write. You know what I mean? Writing is like any artistic practice. You do it all the time. You have to. And you actually get better at doing it, like anything, like riding a bike or anything. You get better by doing it. Some people are like, oh, I don't know, I got to go to all these classes. You should take classes. You should learn the craft. But don't forget, just do it. Writing, reading. To me, that's a constant. And that's what I recommend to anybody.
Thank you. I think that that's great advice. And if you don't have anything necessarily to read, we are the library, obviously, so we have a lot
Absolutely.
of resources.
Absolutely. Love the library. I have to tell you, man, I'm not even lying. Library saved my behind.
That's awesome. It's great to hear.
The treasure of the Mr.
Yeah,
Roger.
yeah. I'm gonna also invite those that are watching us to kind of like send us their questions in. We are basically running through the ones that we have, but if there is an audience questions out there, we would like to highlight them. I do see that there's a question from Madeline Peña. She would like to know what you're currently reading. I know that you mentioned some of your favorite writers right now.
Well, I read like 10 books at one time. I don't know if that's ADD, adult ADD, or whatever it is, but I do. But I am actually reading a classic book, which I don't mind sharing. It was given to me as a gift by my screenwriter friend. I've been working on TV projects, and he gave me this beautiful book. It's an old book, Saul Bellows, Humboldt's Gift. Maybe you can't see it, but I just started reading it. It's a powerful book written by one of the masters of the long form novel. You know what I mean? And Saul Bellows from Chicago, and he's passed already, but he's won Pulitzers and Nobel Prizes. He's a big time writer. I'm just happy to be reading him. I could show you other books I'm reading, but I think that, and I also have to show you this book. I recommend, this is a new book, so that's an old book. I recommend Unforgetting, a memoir of family migration, gangs, and revolution in the Americas by Roberto Lovato. This just came out. I think it was HarperCollins. Anyway, it's a memoir of a Salvadorian journalist who tells the story of the Civil War, but also living in the United States and also going back to El Salvador. So it's got a lot in there. And I can give you more, but I think I'll leave it with those two books.
Great, thank you. I always like writing down the titles whenever I speak to somebody. Check out new things. As a follow-up, I guess I was just wondering, you did mention this a little bit, if you have any projects that you're working on, or what are we expecting maybe coming up from you maybe in the
So
future?
as you know, one of the things that happened last year before the pandemic is I got to write my first play. I wrote it with Hector Rodriguez, and we did it at Casa 0101 Theater in Boyle Heights. It was the adaptation of Always Running. And it's hard to adapt this book because, as you know from the book, there's so many things. We could do 20 plays out of that book alone. We focused on one thing, the interaction between that mentor, Chente, and this crazy, defiant gang kid, lost gang kid, heroin addict, and no longer going to school, named Chin. And how that dynamic began to work such a way that Chin eventually realizes, here is my teacher, here is my guide, and he decides to go that way. We decided to tell that story. So that play opened up a great opportunity to maybe consider doing a TV series of Always Running, and also my other memoir, Calls You Back. So I am working, and again, we got a production team. We got a good team of people. We're going to all the major TV, Showtime, FX. We're going to, Netflix. I can name all of them. We're going to as many as we can now to see if we can do a TV series, not a movie, not a one-time thing, a series based on those two memoirs. We'll see what happens. I'm also interested in new poems. I'm working on new poems. And again, as I was saying, I'd like to consider doing some fiction. I have a science fiction story that's going to be published, I think, later this year. So look for it. It's about LA science fiction stories, speculative fiction from LA. I'm interested in that, so I did my first science fiction story.
I got one question. Thank you. What is the thing you enjoy most about writing?
Oh, that's such a beautiful question, because to me, writing, people think, well, it's a business, it's a profession, it's your job. To me, it's also healing. It's reflective. It puts me in the right space. I try to write in the mornings because that's when I'm most alive. Actually, I'm a morning person. And I try to write maybe 2 or 3 hours a day. It's just hard to do because I have so much work. As you know, me and my wife started this beautiful culture center. There's work there that we want to give. I also do a lot of emails. I'm also speaking. Now we're doing Zoom calls and virtual classrooms and everything all over. But I try to bring in writing, and again, to me, it is a healing, spiritual kind of a thing for me. And I think that spirit comes through, of course, with spiritual practices, but it also comes through with artistic practices.
Yeah. My son asks another question. What is your favorite thing you have written?
Oh wow! You know what? It's a good question. I will have to say, just to be kind of tooting my own horn, my latest book. This is my favorite right now because it just came out just before the pandemic started. Came out around February, and it's a book of essays. It's called "From Our Land to Our Land: Essays, Journeys, and Imaginings from a Native Chicanx Writer." That's my favorite book right now because it just came out. And again, I've been doing writing for the New York Times, the LA Times, Chicago Tribune, The Nation, all kinds of publications. I decided to rewrite those essays, Huffington Post, and put them in this book, but they're all rewritten. So they're not like just collections of old stories or old essays. They're all up to date as much as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez. Mr. Rodarte, do you have check
Yeah,
from chat?
yeah. There's a couple of comments that did come in. Let's see. Do you have anyone in mind to be cast in a potential show?
Well,
That's an interesting.
that is an interesting question. It's hard to think about it that far down. We're so far into the beginning part. I do have the production team, which is good. Me and another, how do you say, Oscar-nominated writers working with me on this. I also have a really great production team, people who've done many movies. I think we're not yet there, but I will say this. I don't want to just be a vehicle for a well-known name. I want new, talented faces. I'm not saying they all have to be, but I do want to provide a space for our gente, my people, Mexican, Central American, to be seen. And I like it to be as real as possible. So we're going to work with the streets, the schools. We're going to work with the homeboy industries, wherever we can, that train young people. There's my good friend Manny Jimenez has got a group of former gangsters and former prisoners who are now doing movies, and I want to work with people like that because my whole thing is to be authentic and real, and I think that's going to be my goal: get as many new faces, but be authentic and real as possible.
Great. Thank you for answering that. We do have a couple, like one, there's this half comment, half question. You know, your talent writer report shares of LA. Can you tell us if you have any special place in LA where you feel inspiration to write?
Well, one good thing about me is I lived all over LA. I'm a really LA guy. I started in Watts. So Watts is my first major important starting place. I used to play, when you can't do it now, in the Watts Towers. In those days, in the 60s, we used to climb it. It was the people that actually had it in their kind of backyard or front yard would try to chase us away. But the point was, we did it. And you know what? Those Watts Towers withstood it. I find that to be a very beautiful place to sit and write. When now you can sit outside, this all fenced up, taken care of. But from Watts to the San Gabriel Valley, I wrote a lot of things in San Gabriel Valley, to East LA, Boyle Heights, Lincoln Heights, City Terrace, and Highland Park, where I lived. In all those communities, I've written. I used to remember, even, I hate to say this, but even when I was doing drugs, I would sit in Evergreen Cemetery in East LA against the headstones and write. Had a little pad, and I would start writing things. So writing to me could be done anywhere. Now, I lived in the harbor area. I lived in San Pedro. But now I'm in the San Fernando Valley, and I've been there 20 years. So I have to say that I'm a Valley guy now. You know? But I don't forget any of the places I live. I don't forget all these communities. I go back there. I speak in libraries and schools and all those communities. So I have to say that now my favorite writing place is my own house. I have my own office. We have a guest house in the back. My son and his girlfriend live on one side, and I have my office on the other side. It's become my sanctuary. It's where all the damage is being done. That's where I go to find my words and my language and my stories and my poems.
Thank you for that. There is, let's see, and this question, maybe it's also in your biography, you self-identify as Chicanx. Somebody mentioned that they like your usage of the word Latinx. for a while now. Could you talk maybe a little bit more about this? I know that there are some
Yeah.
controversies out there.
Yeah, and just so people know, I don't use Chicanx or Latinx for political correctness. I'm not trying to get anybody to agree with me. People should call themselves whatever they want. I do it because I find it that it's, when I say Chicanx, it's very particular. A Chicano, indigenous person from Mexico. It's very clear in the U.S. You know what I'm saying? That's where I get. And it's also there's a political indigenous connection to it. And Latinx for me just connects me with people who aren't Mexican Chicano. There's so many people here, as you know. I work in the Salvadoran, Guatemalan, Honduran community here. I've also been to those countries, so I love the people from Central America. I've also been to South America. I've also been to the Caribbean. I have a Puerto Rican side to my family, so, and that comes from my grandson who's half Puerto Rican. So my idea is as Latinx, I include everybody. You know what I'm saying? Well, if people want to know who I am, I'm Chicanx. That's very particular. But I want to include everybody else that also happens to be mi gente. When we say mi gente, my people, I include all of them.
Thanks for that great answer. It looks like maybe we don't have as many more comments coming, but there is a request, and I don't know if you have this handy. If somebody it's interested in hearing your LA poem, if there is time.
Yes, I think, well, do we have time?
We totally have time, yes.
Good. This is a kind of a long poem, but I'll read it, and I think if we got time, it'll be fun. Yeah. It'll be nice. It's oh yeah. So let me read it, and it's a poem that I wrote two for LA where I was Poet Laureate, and this one is my love poem, and it goes like this, and I'll try to read it as slow as I can. To say I love Los Angeles is to say I love its shadows and night lights. Its meandering streets, the stretch of sunset-colored beaches. Is to say I love the squawking wild parrots, the palm trees that fail to topple in robust winds. That within a half hour of LA's center, you can convert in snow, deserts, mountains, beaches. This is a multi-layered city, unceremoniously built on hills, valleys, ravines. Flying into Burbank Airport in the day, you observe gradations of trees and earth. A city seems to be an afterthought. Skyscrapers popping up from the greenery, guarded by the mighty San Gabriels. Layers of history, each reach deep, run red, scarring the soul of the city. A land where Chinese were lynched, Mexican resistance fighters hounded, workers and immigrants exploited, Japanese removed to concentration camps, blacks forced from farmlands in the South, then segregated, diminished. Here also are blessed native lands, where first peoples like the Tataviam and Tongva bonded with nature's gifts, people of peace, deep stature, loving hands. Yet for all my love, I also abhor the poison time, starting with Spanish settlers, the missions, where 80% of natives who lived and worked in them died, to the ruthless murder of Indians during and after the Gold Rush, the worst slaughter of tribes in the country. From all manner of uprisings, a city of acceptance began to emerge. This is Riot City after all. More civil disturbances in Los Angeles in the past 100 years than any other city. To truly love LA, you have to see it with different eyes. Askew, perhaps, beyond the fantasy-induced Hollywood spectacles. LA is also known for the most violent street gangs, the largest skid row, the greatest number of poor. Yet, I loved LA, even during heroin-inducing nods or running down rain-soaked alleys or getting shot at, even when I slept in abandoned cars alongside the concrete river and during all-night movie showings in downtown Art Deco theaters. The city beckoned as I tried to escape the prison-like grip of its shallowness. Sun-soaked image, suburban quiet, all disarming, hiding the murderous heart that can beat at its center. LA is also lovers' embraces, the most magnificent lies, the largest commercial ports, graveyard shifts, poetry readings, murals, lowriding culture, skateboarding, a sound that hybridized Black, Mexican, as well as Asian and white migrant cultures. You wouldn't have musicians like Richie Valens, The Doors, War, Los Lobos, Charles Wright and the Watts 103rd Street Rhythm Band, Hiroshima, Motley Crue, NWA, or Quetzal without Los Angeles. Or John Fante, Chester Himes, Charles Bukowski, Maricela Norte, and Wanda Coleman as its jester poets. I love LA. I can't forget its smells. I love to make love in LA. It's a great city, a city without a handle, the world's most mixed metropolis of intolerance and divisions. How I love it, how I hate it. Zoot Suit riots, Can't Stay Away, City of Hungers, City of Angers, Ruben Salazar, Rodney King. I like to kick its face in. Hobone City, dried blood on walls, wildfires, taunting dove whales, car fumes and oil derricks, water thievery with every industry possible, and still a one industry town lined by those majestic palm trees and like its people with solid roots, supple trunks, resilient.
Thank you. That is great.
Wow,
Oh
Thank
my
you.
goodness.
definitely
Thank you.
puts LA into perspective.
There you go.
Those
You,
that
you got to
don't
do
know.
it.
Do you have, Mr.
Yeah.
Rodarte, do you have any chat questions?
There doesn't seem to be any more. I did want to mention though that Luisa Rodriguez has been part of the
Yeah.
library for a while now, and a couple of years back ago, you wrote quite a few
Yeah.
blogs for us. So I wanted to invite our readers to maybe take a look at those. I'm gonna put those as a comment so that they can see those the link to the
And you know,
to
I
the
have
blog
to
post
say
written
that
by.
it's kind of weird how life goes on a spiral. That when I was 15, I was homeless, I was in bad shape, and that library was I walked those shelves. And then many years later, at 60 some years old, I'm being given the Poet Laureate there by Mayor Eric Garcetti with a plaque in the very same place that I was lost and confused and probably wouldn't have made it. And it's amazing how sometimes if you live long enough, please try to do everything you can. You will find those spirals, those circles being completed. And I've seen that. And the fact that I could do a blog post for the public library, it's just amazing to me how these beautiful things can happen in life if you live long enough and try to live a good life and try to do your art and be creative and live the life you were meant to live. It works out that way.
Well, thank you. I know that we were thrilled to have you in having those blog posts as well. I don't know. Let's see if we want to give it a minute or not. I know that there was somebody that had asked if you prefer writing fiction or nonfiction better.
Yeah, I think it's always the issue of where I'm at the moment, because again, I had to tell these real stories. I did it first in poetry and then the memoirs. They were so compelling, they had to be told. I lost a lot of friends when I was growing up, 25 friends by the time I was 18. 4 were killed by police officers. I lost many to gang violence, to heroin and overdoses. And since then, I've lost a lot of people. I wanted to tell those stories because they're gone. I want to tell the stories of the others who maybe didn't die, but are sitting in prison or have addictions their whole lives or just trying to survive in a world, working class people. I had to tell those stories. My novel, Music of the Mill, is about the migrants who came over to LA to work into all this great industry. There was steel mills here. There was auto plants. There was garment industry. My mom worked in that. There was, oil refineries. There was, you can name all kinds of industry. We had it. It's almost all gone. We lost so much of it. And I wanted to tell those stories. So to me, that's what's compelling about the truth. Now, nonfiction, that's where that goes into. The fiction stories are powerful and important, and I'm enjoying them now much more than I ever did. Because again, they're not removed from the truth and they're not removed from reality. They just allow you to really be more imaginative about the people and the characters and the situations they fall into. So it really requires, I think, an artistry to be into a story, to tell its truth even though it's made up. You know what I mean? Which is really what all mythology is. And I'm a big mythologist. I think mythology is important. I think we've lost a lot of mythology that we used to have, where people told amazing stories. And even though they were fantastic, they always had some truths and messages for everyday living and just to think about where we're going. And we've lost a lot of those stories. So I like to see fiction more like that.
Thank you. Roma?
Do you want to read any poem on any other your poems? You like it to read it, you love it to read it.
Sure. I think I would like to read a poem to my mother. I've read this poem a lot. And I know there's a lot of young people on this call, so I hope they appreciate this. This is very hard. My mother died in 2008. I did not get along with her. I fought with her a lot, and that was my fault, not really her. I was a very troubled young man, and she kicked me out of the house when I was 15. I don't blame her one bit. People say, "Are you pissed off?" I don't blame her. I totally get it. She should have kicked me out. I love my mom, even though she was very abusive growing up, and she was a very hard person to deal with. But I will say this: just before she died, she got lymphoma, and then she got Alzheimer's, and she has problems with her health all her life: diabetes, thyroid problems. She didn't have any teeth because they all rotten away when she was in her 20s. That's how bad things were. In spite of the fact she was very educated and knowledgeable, she was not healthy. She was obese. She had a lot of issues. But in spite of all the issues, I've always loved her because she was the one that told me about the Tarahumara, the natives of Chihuahua, Mexico. She said, "We're Tarahumara." How many Mexicans hear that from their families? Most Mexicans are indigenous, but they don't know what tribe. Nobody talks about that. We're Mexicano. That's it. That's fine. My mom was very clear, and that was very important. And I went to the Tarahumara land. I went to the Copper Canyon, the Sierra Tarahumara, Chihuahua. I spent time with the people there, and it was because of my mother. And they were happy to see me because they tell me one thing: nobody comes back. Wherever leaves family and everything, they never see it. And they were glad you're interested in us. That's how they were. He said, "Yeah, I have roots here. I mean, I have roots all over Mexico. My dad's from Guerrero, so you can imagine I got a lot of things. And I don't even look Tarahumara. To them, I look Mexicano. You know how they say, you don't even look like us. You look Mexicano. But they loved that I wanted to get to my roots. So I want to read this poem to my mother because it was the earliest memory I had in Watts. It was about 1959. I must have been maybe 4 years old, maybe. I don't. One of the earliest memories, and it had to do with my mom's health because one thing I need to say: the Tarahumara, when they live traditional in the Sierra, are some of the healthiest people in the world. No diabetes, no heart disease, rare cancers. They eat the sisters, the three sisters: corn, squash, and beans. They walk for hours. They run. They're one of the best runners in the world. But once they leave that and they go to the ghettos of like Chihuahua City, my mother was born there in La Tarahumara. That's the name of the ghetto there. They're alcoholics, they're diabetics, they're obese, they beat their wives, they beat their kids. Once they get civilized, they become unhealthy. So this is an ode to my mother who became very unhealthy. But this is in Watts. And it goes like this, and it's about one of the conditions that she had. It's called Heavy Blue Veins, Watts, 1959. Heavy blue veins streak across my mother's legs. Some of them bunched up into dark lumps at her ankles. Mama periodically bleeds them to relieve the pain. She carefully cuts the engorged veins with a razor and drains them into a porcelain-like metal pail called retina. I'm small, and all I remember are dreams of blood. Me drowning in a red sea, blood on sheets on the walls, splashing against the white pail in streams out of my mother's ankle. But they aren't dreams. It is Mama bleeding into day into night, bleeding a birth of memory, my mother, my blood, by the side of the bed, me on the covers, and her slicing into a black vein and filling the pail into some dark, forbidding red nightmare, which never stops coming, never stops pouring this memory of Mama and blood and Watts.
Thank you. It's very beautiful. Oh, it's my God. Have you any book translated in any other languages, other than Spanish? Any
Yeah,
other language?
apparently somebody says that I've had books in Europe published, and I don't even know. But I've had my poetry published in Arabic and in uh, Japanese. I've been published in Japanese magazines, and I've had it in Italian and German and French. So
Oh,
they've been published. Not necessarily the full books, but some of my works, some of my essays, and even some of my stories. They tell me that there's books out there of mine that I don't even know who they are. I do know that England has their own version of my book, Always Running, and mostly it is Spanish. In Mexico and Central America, the Spanish version sells pretty good there. Um, but again, I don't. I should track this stuff. I know I'm really bad about it. And my agent, I've switched agents, so I don't know what my previous agent did, and now my new agent needs to find out. So, I guess I'm not really worried about it. I like to be translated as much as possible, but you never know how that goes.
Yeah. We
Mr.
do have, yeah,
Rodate?
we do have just a comment from one of our viewers about the messages of acceptance, forgiveness, and understanding. Just mentioning that we need this acceptance, this kindness today more than ever.
No, I appreciate that. I have had to learn to do that. And again, I grew up with a lot of pain and hurt. The body warfares were deadly, as you know. Some of them are still going on. We learned to hate people that were just like us. I hate that I got caught up in it, but they killed our friends. We had to shoot at them and hurt them. It was quite violent. This is in the 60s. It's gotten worse now, but in those days, we were using guns and we were hurting each other. And I will tell you a story. I had dinner with one of my so-called enemies. Years ago, he was the artist of his barrio and I was the artist of my barrio. But we hated each other because we were different neighborhoods. And one day he's lost two sons, unfortunately, but his first son was killed by guys in my neighborhood. So I contacted him because my son was in prison at the time. And I said, listen, I want to talk to you. We should talk. My son's in prison. Your son's dead. Let's talk. So he did. We had dinner in Hollywood. He's one of the most famous tattoo artists in the world. He's the Chicano ink master. He was the first Chicano to bring the black and gray style that Chicanos started. And now it's all over the world. I've been to Europe. People do black and gray. They don't even know who started. Don't know the history. The Japanese know because they tell you because they have their own style, and then they have Chicano style. That's really interesting how the Japanese get it. But anyway, I sat down with him, and he told a story. We were talking and everything. My condolences for his son, and then he told a story about he was shooting in one of my neighborhoods. And in my neighborhood, he was shooting, and I told him, well, guess what? I didn't know it was you, but you were shooting at me. I remember that incident. And he looked at me like, uh-oh. And I go, no. I don't have no more rancor, no hate, no feeling. Look at what all the damage we've done to each other. Look at your son. Look at my son. We have hurt enough. Let's not do this no more. And we dedicated ourselves to try to bring peace and love and help as much as we can. His name is Freddie Negrete. And he's got a book you should read called Smile Now, Cry Later. Because he's the tattoo artist that created the Smile Now, Cry Later motif that a lot of gangsters all over California and other places do. So I want to honor Freddie Negrete for being so-called enemy, and now we're for peace. Now we're friends. I don't have no issue with any of my neighborhoods that we used to fight with. The play always running was about Lomas and Sagra, two enemies. They're still at war, but I said, we're the same. Let's come together. And that's really my message. So forgiveness, compassion is a very important part of what I do now. I don't want to go in this world with any more hate. Again, the love for my mom. Yeah, she did a lot of things that she shouldn't have done, but I did worse things. So now it's love. My dad, just so you know, was the worst person you can imagine. You have to read my memoir. It calls you back to get into what he did. Terrible things to my dad. But guess what? As much as I hated my dad when he died and I wanted to curse him out, I wasn't there. I had to be on the phone. I was in Chicago. My dad was in LA, and I didn't want to go see him. That's how bad it was. But he was dying that day. And my mom says, she called me up and said, you have to talk to him. He's dying. He's not going to leave. He's going to go any minute. Oh, and I was going to curse him out, and I couldn't. I couldn't curse him out. So I told him something he never told me. I love you. And that was important. To be able to do that. To forgive even the pain that others cause you. That's the truth. So that's important.
Thank you for sharing those stories with us, and I know it's a lot of personal.
Yeah, I don't mind. I think it's good to be vulnerable when you can and helpful, because I know in the long run, this is what makes a life. All our ordeals, all our trials and tribulations. If you learn from them, then you can bless the world. If you don't learn from them, you curse the world. You know what I'm saying? So I've been through a lot of things. I've seen my son did 15 years in prison. I've seen so many people go through stuff. But guess what? Even my oldest son, who's 45 years old, is now blessing the world. He does poetry. He's helping formerly incarcerated. He's doing really good. He's clean and sober like I am. I've been clean and sober for 27 years, and he's clean and sober. So to me, it's like if you go through rough things, that's life. Step up, step out, and be a wise, sage person from everything you've been through.
Great. there aren't any more like questions. There are some just comments that are coming in. I don't know. We may just end early. It's only 10 minutes out. And Ruma, I think
Wow.
unless you want any other information. I know this. It was
Well,
pretty
I don't
fast.
mind hearing from some of the comments because we can always comment on the comments.
Yeah. So, some of the things that came in is, they liked your historical
Cool.
information. Humanity's consciousness transformation. It's possible. It's happening.
That's beautiful. It's all great,
Yeah.
both of them, both of things. I think it's important for us to be in a different place because, as you know, our country is in a rough time. And again, where do we go from here? I think there's a lot of good things we can do. I don't think we have to be stuck to the paradigms that have been there before. And I think that people are looking at the world as it's shifting. It's already shifting. And I do think that there's a world that could be equitable, that could be peaceful, it could be safe, without having to hurt people, punish people, go to war with people. I'm totally against the war economy. I'm against poverty. I think poverty doesn't have to exist. I'm against the social injustices that we've had for so long. We don't need to have them. Most of them are man-made social injustices that we can address. And of course, I'm also against the climate change and the poisoning of our earth and sky. So let's then think about how to answer those deep questions and do it in a good way. You know what I mean? Do it with dignity. That's where I'm asking for politicians and everybody else, which we know they've lost their dignity. A lot of them have completely lost it. So let's hang on to it and move forward so that everybody, I guess I would say, to me, the thing to keep in mind is the shared well-being of everyone. That, I think, is what should push all our decisions, political and otherwise. And again, I don't want to get too political in here, other than I can't help but be political, but other than to say, let's think about the shared well-being that all of us can be part of. And going back to the library, I found that it was the great equalizer. Anybody can go to the library. Poor kid like me, troubled kid like me can go there and learn. Just like somebody that has better means in their life, they can go to the library. It's a great equalizer. It helps us all learn to share the stories of the world, the knowledge of the world. You know, it's very important that we have that kind of concept. It's one of the best things the United States ever created was public library. And I want to support that, and I hope all young people fight for that and make sure that these libraries stay open. They got the resources they need, and that we make sure that people use those libraries.
This is a perfect transition to one of the questions that just came in. Is somebody's interested in ELAC libraries, actually. What are your favorite bookstores or libraries in Los Angeles?
So to speak for bookstores, I have to first say Tia Chucha's bookstore is my favorite, because otherwise they would beat me up if I don't say that. We have a really, it's a small bookstore, but we cater to a community that has no bookstores. 500,000 people without no trade bookstores. That's a lot of our communities. If you go to South Central parts of East LA, there's no bookstore. So I feel we're doing a service that's important. And beyond that, Romans, I have to say that we got to support Romans Bookstore in Pasadena. It's one of my favorites. They're having a hard time. They actually might close down. Can you imagine? They've been around for over 100 years. And if anybody knows Romans, support them. Book Soup in Hollywood, all the independent bookstores, the Skyline Lights. There's so many good, important bookstores out there. Please support them, especially the independent ones. They're barely making it because of the pandemic. Tia Chuchas is doing well as far as bookstores, because we started selling more books virtually than when we actually had an open space. As far as libraries, I just have to tell you I love all libraries, but that Central Library downtown will always have a special place in my heart.
Thank you. Anything else, Mr. Rodarte? Do you want to tell?
I think that this is it for the questions that are coming in.
6 minutes. Yeah, 5 minutes.
Well,
so, unless Mr. Rodriguez say anything.
Well, and again, just to sound to, especially to young people, this is a rough time, but I'm also feeling like young people themselves have the future in their hands. And so we as adults and mentors and guides, we should stand with you all to make that future happen. I know how people say, well, young people in the future, put it all in their hands, but I think we all can do it. And I will say this, I am 66 years old this year. Supposedly, it's time for me to retire, but I'm not retiring. I'm going to refire. Refiring is what I'm doing. And I feel like that's my goal now as an older person, to still be active and passionate, to still be out there. You know how people get old and they get a little tired and they don't want to do things. Not me, man. I want to be active and I want to be out there. But let's make sure we do it safely. Everyone be safe. The COVID will eventually be an issue. We're not going to be so much happening. But in the meantime, we want to spare as many people as possible. Listen to the doctors, listen to the scientists, listen to the best minds. Be safe and be careful. But I think we can live through all this and we'll get stronger through all of it. That's all I have to say. I really appreciate the time for especially you both allowing me to speak and do my poetry and to answer these questions.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Rodriguez, for spending your valuable time with us.
Yeah. So
Thank
I'm going to
you.
say goodbye to everybody. Yeah.
Thank you all for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed this conversation with Mr. Luis Rodriguez. His books are available in the library and can be requested as part of our library to-go service. Please make sure to check out additional teens programs in our website at lapl.org. And once again, thank you. I really appreciate Mr. Rodriguez.